review of what a trifecta is, why it's important, and where we are heading into the 2016 elections. After that, Sam and I will go back and forth talking about each of the states where we think that there is a potential for a pickup in trifecta status or a potential for a break in trifecta status. So getting right into it, a state government trifecta occurs when one political party holds the governorship, state senate, and state house. This is important, this concept of a trifecta, because in state lawmaking in many states, the governor, Senate majority leader, and House majority leader play decisive roles in the legislative process. So legislators in these key leadership positions control how and what legislation is voted on. They control committee assignments and, importantly, committee chairmanships. And of course, the governor has the power of the veto. So that's also very important. Heading into the election, there are 30 state government trifectas. 23 of those are held by Republicans, and another 7 are held by Democrats. There's been a steady increase in the number of trifectas since 1992, where in 1992 you had just 19 state government trifectas. And really the number of trifectas exploded after the 2010 election, to the point where heading into the 2013 election, there were actually 38 state government trifectas. And that was the highest total in more than 60 years. So again, you know, it essentially doubled in 1992, where you had 19, and then after 2012, where you had 38 trifectas. So getting right into the states, in Colorado, Democrats are trying to pick up a state government trifecta. To do so, they need to win control of the state Senate. Republicans currently hold that chamber by 1-seat majority. Now, the 2 most vulnerable districts in the chamber are currently held by Republicans. And one thing to note about Colorado is that the state house is also a battleground. Democrats control that by 3 seats, and you know, to gain a trifecta, they would need to hold on to that as well. In Iowa, for Republicans to gain a trifecta here, they would need to win control of the state Senate. Democrats currently control the chamber with a 3-seat majority. Now, there are no open seats where Republicans have opportunities for gains. And open seats are where an incumbent did not choose to run for re-election. So what that means is Republicans will have to defeat Democratic incumbents in order to pick up any seats there.
In Indiana, Democrats could break a 5-year Republican trifecta if they win the governorship this year. This is a really interesting race. Governor Mike Pence was running for re-election and withdrew his candidacy after the primary elections to run for vice president with Donald Trump. The replacement candidate, Lieutenant Governor Eric Holcomb, has never been elected to public office. Pence appointed him to the lieutenant governorship in February 2016 after a vacancy. The Democratic candidate is former Speaker of the House John Gregg, who lost to Pence in the 2012 gubernatorial election by just 3 percentage points. So there's still an incumbency advantage here for Republicans, and the race is rated lean Republican, but a big challenge for Holcomb is to increase his name recognition before the general election. This trifecta is definitely at risk.
In Kentucky, Republicans are trying to gain a trifecta. To do so, they need to win control of the state house, where Democrats currently have a 6-seat majority. Now, there are 66 districts in the Kentucky House where you have general election competition, so a Democrat and Republican facing off. 14 seats have held competitive elections in recent years, so there's definitely room for the Kentucky House to move. In Maine, Republicans are trying to gain a trifecta. To do so, they need to win the state house, where Democrats have a 9-seat majority. In the 2012 presidential election, 53 out of the 151 state house districts had a margin of victory of less than 10%, which is what we consider to be in the competitive or mildly competitive range. So Republicans would need to gain control. They would need to gain 5 seats in order to take control of the chamber. And there are 137 districts this year with general election competition. So there's, again, definitely opportunity for them to do so. To break the Republican trifecta in in Michigan, Democrats need to win control of the state house. Now, Michigan's interesting because it's the only state where you have 100% participation in every single legislative district by Democrats and Republicans. So every general election has a Democrat and Republican running in it. Now, Barack Obama won the state by a 10-point margin in 2012. However, Democrats were only able to pick up 4 seats in that election, and that sort of indicates that the 9 seats that they need this year could be a pretty difficult task. In 2014, 6 districts were considered competitive or mildly competitive. So there's not much room for error for Democrats in Michigan. In Minnesota, Democrats are trying to gain a trifecta. To do so, they need to win the state house. In the state house, there's 129 seats with general election competition. 24 districts have held competitive elections in recent years. In a possible bellwether, earlier this year, in February, a Republican candidate won a special election in a district that President Obama won by with 57% of the vote in 2012. So that could indicate where the chamber is moving.
Missouri has a divided government, and Republicans could gain a trifecta here if they win the governorship. The general election has the popular Democratic Attorney General Chris Koster against Republican Eric Greitens, who is a former Navy SEAL and has styled himself as a political outsider. He had a surprising primary win over several establishment candidates, and the Republican Governors Association sent him a very large chunk of cash shortly thereafter, indicating that Missouri is an offensive target for them. And polls have Koster with a slight lead over Greitens, but not enough to be statistically significant. And this race is a pure toss-up. In Montana, Republicans would need to unseat Democratic Governor Steve Bullock to gain a trifecta. This race is rated lean Democrat. Bullock has an incumbency advantage and is a fairly popular governor, but he's a Democrat in a red state. Republicans have a fairly strong candidate in software executive Greg Gianforte this year, who is spending lots of his own money. And the RGA also made an ad buy on his behalf here in Montana. So there's a possibility that Republicans could pick up a trifecta, but this one is more of a long shot.
Democrats are trying to break up a Republican trifecta in Nevada. Both chambers are vulnerable, with Republicans holding the Senate with a 1-seat majority and the state assembly with a 7-seat majority. Now, the state Senate is most likely to change hands. There's only a couple of competitive districts in the state Senate, but Democrats are targeting the 2 seats without Republican incumbents running in them. The assembly is also at risk of flipping, and there are enough competitive districts to make that happen. In New Hampshire, for that to become a Democratic trifecta, Democrats would need to win control of both chambers. Republicans currently hold a 4-seat majority in the Senate and a 76-seat majority in the House. While that 76-seat majority might sound pretty huge, it is a 400-member chamber, and the state House has shown to be pretty swingy, I guess I would say, since 2010. Republicans took control of the chamber in 2010, at which point they had a 192-seat majority. After the 2012 elections, Democrats had a 40-seat majority, and then Republicans came back in 2014 and took it with a 75-seat majority. And now heading into the election, we're at a 76-seat majority for Republicans.
Alternatively, if Republicans maintain majority control in both chambers of the legislature in New Hampshire and win the governorship, New Hampshire could become a Republican trifecta. New Hampshire voters are notoriously unpredictable, as Tyler indicated, and polling in the gubernatorial race is all over the place. New Hampshire has gone to the Democratic presidential candidate for the last 3 elections. The incumbent Democratic governor is running for U.S. Senate, and the executive counselor, Colin Van Ostern, won the Democratic nomination pretty easily. So on one hand, it seems like they might have a lot going for them. On the other hand, Republican executive counselor Chris Sununu is also a strong candidate. He's the son of a former governor, so he's got that name recognition. And he stayed very moderate during the primary elections, which actually nearly lost him the Republican nomination, but will most likely help him appeal to a wider electorate in the general. So this one's a pure toss-up. Lots of fun things could happen in New Hampshire this year.
In New Mexico, Republicans are trying to gain a trifecta. To do so, they need to win control of the state Senate, where Democrats have a 6-seat majority. So Republicans would need to gain 4 seats total to flip the chamber. And there are 15 districts with competition, 8 of which had competitive elections in 2012. In New York, there's a possibility for a Democratic trifecta. Democrats would need to further their numerical majority in the state Senate. It's currently tied with 1 vacancy. If you give that vacancy to the previous party, Democrats have a 1-seat numerical majority. However, a power sharing agreement gives Republicans effective control of the chamber right now. So what's unclear is to what degree Democrats need to gain seats in order to break up that power sharing agreement. It might be that they only need to pick up a couple to, I guess, make the agreement a little less legitimate and break it that way. Or they could pick up a bunch and make it outright impossible to have a power sharing agreement.
In North Carolina, if Democrats can unseat incumbent Governor Pat McCrory, they'll break a 3-year Republican trifecta. Now, Republicans gained this trifecta in 2013. Before that, Democrats had trifecta control from 1999 until 2010. So it was a fairly rapid shift in power. McCrory is facing a tough reelection effort against popular Attorney General Roy Cooper, who has a slight lead in the polls. Outside spending groups have already dropped about $4 million in this race alone. North Carolina is a battleground this year, and Republicans are on the defensive. There's a real threat they'll lose this trifecta. This race is a pure toss-up. In Vermont, the gubernatorial race is rated lean Democrat, but if a Republican wins, it will end a 5-year Democratic trifecta. Former Transportation Secretary Sue Mentor will compete with Republican Lieutenant Governor Phil Scott in the general election. Scott is fairly popular in Vermont, and the state has a history of electing Republican lieutenant governors to the governorship, 2 in the past 3 decades. Despite the race rating, I think Republicans have a real shot at the governorship here.
Washington has the possibility to become a Democratic trifecta. For that to happen, Democrats would need to win control of the state Senate and hold on to the state House. In the state Senate, Republicans currently have a majority of just 1 seat, and the Republican Party gained control of the chamber in 2014, so that's been a recent change there. And like I pointed to, Democrats currently control the House, but it is also a battleground chamber, so they would need to maintain control of that in order to pick up that trifecta.
If Republicans win the governorship in West Virginia, they'll gain trifecta control of the state. The Democratic Governor Earl Ray Tomblin is term limited, and the general election has Republican Senate President Bill Cole against wealthy Democratic businessman Jim Justice. West Virginia hasn't had a Republican governor since 2001, but over the past few years, the state seems to have been shifting to the right. In 2014, Republicans won the legislature for the first time since the 1930s. So while it might seem that the Republican Party has an edge, Jim Justice has a very strong lead in the polls, and he's dropping a lot of his own money in this race. And this one's also rated as a toss-up.
Okay, and our last state, Wisconsin, Democrats are trying to break up a Republican trifecta. It's fairly unlikely due to the number of seats up for election. There aren't that many seats up for election, and Democrats would need to flip 3 seats in order to take the chamber. The problem for them is that there's only really 2 seats where it's really viable for Democrats to make pickups. And there's a 3rd seat where Democrats have a vulnerable district, so they would need to hold on to that as well. So again, 3 seats in order to take the chamber. It's possible for them to do, but pretty tough. Okay, so that's our rundown of all of these states and trifectas. I'm going to hand it over to Kayla, and if you guys have any questions, you can leave them in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer those.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Like Tyler just said, you can leave questions. Both there's a chat and a Q&A tool. But I want to start off with a question that I've been wondering. I'm curious if there are any races where you're seeing the presidential race impact anything, any races that could also impact the trifecta status of a state.
Yeah, well, in general, at least for state legislatures, the presidential race generally does have a pretty significant impact on state legislative elections. Races in Washington, I guess, is a fine example where that's going to go for Clinton in the presidential election. And so essentially, because that's already decided, it's not a swing state, Republican legislative candidates have felt more comfortable distancing themselves from Donald Trump. And so I guess that's like a more specific district level example of what you're asking.
Cool. Thank you. I think those look like all the questions that we have for right now. At least for me, that's a lot of information, so I'm not surprised. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us and let you know that if you have questions later, please reach out to us. There's editor@ballotpedia.org. You can follow us on Twitter @ballotpedia or facebook.com/ballotpedia. And then I want to plug something else. Today at 5 p.m., we will be hosting a Facebook live stream event about presidential battleground races. And so we'll be around to answer your questions about which way states will go, the electoral college, whatever questions you may have. So hopefully you all can join us for that. And thank you so much for your time today. And hopefully we'll see you at our other 2 webinars this week. Thank you.